Chapter 15. The Toxic River. After making sure there were no immediate dangers, the band of remaining travelers recovered their possessions and searched the bodies of the dead. Euclidean shook his head to himself as he realized this was the third occasion that he was searching bodies in as little as 3 days. Jacen had not returned, and everyone in the party was tense as they gathered the weapons from the corpses and stacked the crushed and broken bodies of the bandits in a low gully in the nearby forest. They recovered all but 10 of the gold coins from their original treasures and added to their findings many spears, daggers, and short swords, more than they could carry on with them. Additionally, there were several small pouches of silver that were taken off the dead bodies and added to the mounting pile of treasure they had accumulated on their short adventure. While Euclidean and Chino worked the bodies, Aramis, Benny, and Hope took turns being with Janae, who shivered under a blanket at the recent ordeal she had undergone at the hands of the forest bandit leader. Speaking to the group, Euclidean explained they would not be able to take the new weapons with them and suggested hiding them nearby in case they would be able to someday recover the weapons. The recovered armor and weapons were hidden at a rocky outcropping in the forest, and the traumatized group walked 2 miles away before stopping to set up to camp for the night. Everyone was exhausted after the ordeal, and each was quiet as the late night came upon them. Euclidean and Chino began to build up the campfire, while Aramis looked after Hope, and Janae ministered to the shallow wound on Benny's chest. Just then, Jacen walked pensively back into the camp, causing everyone to tense and look at him. He was carrying a large boar over one shoulder that had been cleaned, and brought it over to the fire. As everyone watched, they could see he was apparently no longer rage-filled as he had been before. As he brought the animal down to the ground by the fire, he reached into the folds of his clothing and brought out the missing bag of gold coins and a smaller bag of silver and tossed them to Euclidean, who stood nearby and caught the bags from the air. Jacen noticed the tension amongst his band travelers, but pretended not to see and turned back to the board to prepare the meat over the fire. Euclidean relaxed as Jacen turned away, and Chino removed his hand from the dagger he had unconsciously grabbed when Jacen returned to the camp. Just then, Janae stood up from where she was sitting and walked over to Jacen, whose back was to her. As she approached the young man, she reached out her hand and gently placed it on his shoulder, causing him to stop what he was doing and become motionless. Janae turned him towards her and looked him right in the eyes, then embraced him and whispered, "Thank you." Jacen tensed but allowed her to embrace him and weakly held an arm up around her. After a moment, she left him and sat back down to oil her bow in her nightly routine, the recent ordeal seemingly washed away by the presence of her savior. Jacen paused as she walked away, then quietly returned to preparing the dinner. Everyone in the camp watched this exchange, and somehow the other members of the group were able to relax enough as the night wore on with no further incidents. Soon, the exhausted group was eating the roast pork, and everyone ate their fill. One by one, the group fell asleep, with Euclidean taking the first watch, keeping a wary eye on Jacen while the rest of the travelers fell into an exhausted slumber. Jacen did not sleep that night and watched over the group, a silent and brooding protector who periodically scratched at the birthmark beneath his left eye. The next morning, the group awoke refreshed and continued their journey with the strange events from the previous evening still upon everyone's mind. As Chino led their recovered mule wagon that had been restocked with all their spoils, Euclidean directed the travelers along a small path in the forest in an eastern direction and looked at the members of his group as they walked. Aramis walked protectively near Hope, who was practicing the movement of drawing an arrow from her quiver and placing it into position on her bow. Janae and Benny walked together with the huntress carrying her bow at the ready and the short boy holding one of his special rocks in his hand. Janae looked around the area as she walked and periodically glanced at Jacen. Jacen walked at the back of the wagon away from the group. He did not make eye contact with anyone else and was walking along whispering to himself with his strange staff weapon held in his hand at the ready. The runes on his weapon and forearm protector momentarily glinted in the early morning light. Euclidean considered Jacen and sensed the young fighter was embarrassed at having shown such a dangerous aspect of his character. In retrospect, the bounty hunter was still amazed that the young fighter had killed so many men single-handedly, and found that he would be more cautious when talking to the young man who now stood apart from the group. After 2 hours of traveling through the forest, the travelers came to the outskirts of the toxic river that ran through various parts of the great forest and walked their mule and wagon to an outlier shed that stood erected at one end of the river next to a small pier where a barge raft was attached. The brown and muddy river flowed past the travelers at a slow pace as they approached the shed. An old man was sitting on a chair on the small porch of the shed as the travelers walked up. He was smoking a pipe and looked curiously at the travelers as they brought their wagon to a stop. Euclidean walked up to the old man and said, "Greetings, we seek passage down river to here," showing the man the spot on his map. The old man wrinkled his eyes at the map and said in a thick forest accent, "Cost you 10 silvers." Euclidean paid the fare, and the old man stood up slowly to lead the travelers onto the barge. The craft was large, holding the mule, wagon, and 7 travelers with enough room to spare. The old man positioned himself on a stool in front of the rudder system at the back of the large floating platform. As soon as the travelers were settled, the man pushed off from the pier with a guide pole and allowed the gentle current of the river to carry them gently along its path. Euclidean stared at the water and was about to put his hands in to gather up some to drink when the old man spoke up. "I wouldn't do that. The water is foul and unclean for drinking," said the grizzled man who spoke in his accented way. Euclidean was about to ignore the old man when he noticed the corpse of a pack horse float past with its entrails hanging out of a large wound in its side. He quickly pulled back from the water as the old man laughed. "How long until we reach our destination?" asked Euclidean. The old man shrugged and said, "Depends on the current, but at least 2 hours." Soon the old man pulled out a stubby pipe and packed it with weed. He carefully produced an old mechanical lighter and used it to light his pipe and began humming an old river melody as the barge floated gently along the river. Euclidean walked over and brought his map to review with Chino. While Aramis and Hope visited with each other and Benny, Jacen sat by himself, away from the others, and Janae walked over to him to pass the time. "How are you doing, my strange friend?" she asked in a friendly voice. Jacen looked up at her as she approached and grinned in a strained manner. He said, "I'm sorry you saw me like that last night. There are some strange things about me that I hope to tell you about someday." Janae listened to him and nodded. She said, "I suppose there are things about a sorcerer that are secret." Jacen nodded and smiled at her, and the small talk between them relieved some of the pent-up tension he had noticed growing over the past several days. It felt good to smile and let the tension go. Janae was enjoying their talk and could see that he was becoming something more akin to the boy she had met and had been attracted to. She was gladdened that he was not always the brooding and quiet sorcerer that privately frightened her, yet had saved her from being raped by the bandits the previous evening. Janae looked into his eyes and saw that he was struggling to look into her eyes. The young huntress gently reached up to place her hand upon his cheek and turned his face to look at her. "Thank you for rescuing us last night with your magic ways," Janae said, and leaned in closer to Jacen. As she leaned in, Jacen tensed and turned toward her, his shaking hands reaching out to touch her arms. Janae leaned in and kissed Jacen very lightly upon the lips, holding the kiss and letting the moment and feeling build between them. Jacen began kissing her more passionately, and at one moment roughly grabbed and pulled her into a sensual embrace. Janae leaned into him further, then pulled away from him breathless. "Hey, slow down," she said in a shaking voice. Jacen was breathing heavy. After a moment, he quietly apologized and turned away from her. Janae was confused and impassioned by the kiss and wanted to explore the feelings further. She reached out to Jacen and placed her hand gently upon his and sat with him as their journey continued. After several moments, Jacen's shoulders relaxed and he turned back to her and placed his hand over hers. The line of the forest passed by the group as the barge floated along the river, causing everyone to relax for a moment since the journey had begun. Everyone took a turn to nap, sharing the duty to stay awake and look out for danger. Jacen did not sleep and continued to periodically whisper a mantra to himself and rub at his birthmark. Just then, the old man cursed and shook out his pipe into the water as he shouted for everyone to rouse themselves. "We've got company," he said as he put his pipe away and pointed at a small boat that traveled behind the group, tailing the floating barge of travelers. The small craft carried 10 rough-looking men who wore no armor but all carried long daggers. Just then, one of them lit something on fire and threw it in a long but accurate arc, causing the lit package to land on the surface of the barge of travelers. The old man dropped the rudder arm and yelled for Euclidean to take it as he dashed forward to kick the package into the river. The package landed in the water with a splash, and the old man breathed a sigh of relief. Euclidean grabbed the rudder arm and worked the unfamiliar tool back and forth in the water. The craft began moving askew to the left and entered a split in the river. Just then, the barge entered a faster current and began moving down the river at a murderous pace. The small craft continued to follow behind them. "Who are they?" shouted Euclidean as he struggled to right the rudder arm.
"Pirates intent on taking whatever you have in your wagon, and maybe your lives," responded the old man.
Euclidean and Chino exchanged a quick look between them at this news, and the manservant readied his short swords nearby his master. Jacen pulled out his staff and secured his travel bag to the barge, then checked Janae and saw that she was readying her bow and had several arrows set around her, covered position behind the mule wagon. Benny stood protectively nearby with his special rocks ready to throw. Aramis held a borrowed spear and stood uncertainly near his daughter Hope, who was mimicking her movements with Janae, and had strung her bow and prepared arrows in a similar fashion.
"Be sure to kick overboard anything they throw onto our barge, or it will explode,"
the old man said to everyone in a loud voice. The pirates closed in and began throwing many of the lit packages on board. Soon everyone was running around kicking the packages into the river where the fuse would sputter out. Just then one of the packages ignited and a loud explosion occurred, causing the surface of the barge to catch on fire. The old man ran over and began splashing water onto the fire before it spread out of control. As the old man splashed water onto the fire, the pirate boat moved up alongside the barge, and several of the roughened pirates began jumping onto the barge. The movement of everyone running and the impact of the jumping pirates caused the barge to lurch side to side, and everyone struggled to maintain their balance. The mule bellowed in fright as Euclidean, Chino, and Jacen ran forward to engage the pirates. Each quickly learned that these were no ordinary fighters, but men trained to fight on a boat or barge, which rocked along with the fast-moving waves of the river. The three fighting men engaged the pirates as the barge rocked dangerously side to side in the fast-moving river. All told, 8 of the pirates were able to jump aboard the fast-moving craft, while the other 2 remained on their small boat. One of the remaining pirates continued to lob the small explosives onto the barge, causing the old man, Hope, Janae, and Aramis to run around and extinguish them, effectively taking them out of the fight. Benny struggled to hold on to the wildly rocking barge they all rode upon, as the wagon mule brayed out in fright in all the commotion. The 8 pirates fought back against the 3 men. The barge rocked up and down and side to side as the pirates leaped about in their strange fighting way upon the water. Their leaps and jumps were sure, and it seemed as if they were magically glued to the barge no matter the direction it rolled. Euclidean and Chino were unaccustomed to this manner of fighting, and only Euclidean's long-term experience with up-close fighting helped him to survive. Chino began taking wounds and was soon down to his dagger as his short swords had been disarmed with cuts to the back of his hands. With blood running down both hands, Chino continued to fight off the attacking pirates as best as he was able, while trying to simultaneously keep his footing. Jacen was unperturbed by the motion of the barge and was just as balanced as if he were on solid ground. Using his vibrating staff in an artful manner, he effectively engaged 4 of the spinning pirate fighters and soon had tripped one of the pirates into the water, who screamed and frantically began swimming for the shore in a fast-moving current. After a moment, his body was sucked under the current, not to be seen again. The pirates' 3 remaining companions encircled Jacen more warily as they recommenced the attack. Benny took careful aim and threw one of his stones at the pirate, who was lobbing the lit explosives at them from the nearby small boat, but the rocking of the barge from all the fighting was causing him to miss his mark, and his stones flew harmlessly into the water beyond his target. Finally, after many throws, the barge was still enough for Benny to connect with one of his thrown missiles, and one of his rocks struck the pirate, driving the small boat in the forehead, causing a bloody gash to appear. The pirate with the gashed forehead slumped over the steering mechanism of the small boat, causing it to veer sharply away out of range from the main barge. With the last of the burning packages extinguished, Aramis picked up his spear weapon and ran to help the other fighters. Just then, the barge tipped sharply, causing Aramis to lose his footing and slide toward the edge of the barge dangerously fast. He cried out as he slid toward the side and dropped his weapon. Hope cried out, "Papa!" as he slid. Janae was just in the process of taking aim with her arrow when she noticed Aramis slipping toward the edge of the barge. With great calm, she changed her aim at the last minute and sent her arrow flying at Aramis. Just as he was about to pitch into the fast-moving current of toxic water, Janae's arrow found its mark and plunged through a portion of Aramis's tunic, effectively pinning him to the barge. His spear continued its flight and fell overboard in the onrushing current, as Aramis struggled to right himself. Hope ran over to help her father and almost lost her footing as the barge rocked unsteadily from side to side. Euclidean fought as best he could in the unusual fighting environment, and after a long engagement, plunged one of his short swords into the chest of an attacking pirate. The man screamed and went down, only to be savagely kicked by Euclidean into the water, where the man sank beneath the fast-moving waves with a bubbling sound. Euclidean turned to see Chino, who was frantically waving his dagger at 3 pirates closing in on him. Jacen was effectively holding off 3 others and dispatched one of them with a sharp blow to the head, causing the pirate to fall unmoving to the surface of the barge. Jacen swirled his vibrating weapon and blocked the next strike from the 2 remaining pirates he faced before moving into a suddenly fierce combination of spinning staff attacks. Euclidean knew he must help Chino, and taking careful aim, he threw one of his short swords at the back of an attacking pirate. The blade struck the pirate hilt first, causing him to stumble and allow Chino an opening to leap over the pirate and run over to position himself near Euclidean. The 3 pirates turned toward Euclidean and Chino, who had picked up one of the fallen blades of the pirates and stood next to his master. The barge was not rocking as heavily as it had before, and the 2 bounty hunters faced the 3 pirates. Just then an arrow appeared as if by magic in the eye of one of the 3 pirates, who screamed and fell backwards into the torrent of water with a great splash. Euclidean glanced at Hope, who was shakily reloading an arrow to her bow to shoot again. With the numbers now more equal, Euclidean and Chino worked together side by side to engage the 2 remaining pirates facing them. The sound of swords striking each other was heard as the men engaged each other in a whirling sword dance. Jacen was moving back and forth with the 2 pirates he faced and grinned as he noticed the growing expression of apprehension on their faces. Suddenly, the barge was struck from the side as the small pirate boat returned and slammed into the large floating craft. The jarring sensation threw everyone from their feet, but Jacen was able to maintain a foothold and use the interruption to sweep one of the 2 pirates he was facing into the current of water. The remaining pirate jumped to his feet and ran past Jacen to jump onto his own smaller boat, which pulled away for another ram. Euclidean and Chino had both risen to their feet and were effectively holding off their attackers when Jacen came to join them. Together, the 3 fighters overcame the pirates, and the final 2 were dispatched and thrown overboard. The other 2 pirates on the small boat witnessed their friends being thrown overboard and pulled away to the side of the river, their pursuit at an end. The group gathered their wits together and took stock of their condition. The old man had apparently fallen overboard during the fight, and no one knew of his plight. Euclidean sheathed his remaining short sword and grabbed hold of the rudder arm to take control of the fast-moving craft. Chino moved in to help his master as the others gathered together. Finally, Euclidean and Chino brought the craft under control and steered to an embankment where they could stop and try to figure out where they were. The group pulled the frightened mule and wagon back onto dry ground, each person thankful to be done with the dangerous barge ride. Once everyone was off the craft, the current soon pulled the barge away with one of the bodies of a pirate still aboard and unmoving. As Aramis helped to bandage Chino's hand wounds, Euclidean looked around at the edge of the forest where they stood and decided on a route that he believed would lead them back onto the path they had been searching for. After everyone had taken the opportunity to catch their breath, the travelers set off once again into the arms of the forest, this time on the opposite side of the toxic river.